Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another BioTools Innovator Live webinar. We're going to give this a few seconds to let people in. So as you go in, please, if you could rename yourself to name and company so we can easily call on you and our panelists can identify you. All right, I see everybody coming in. All right, as we give this another couple of seconds to let everyone settle in, we are again welcoming everyone to webinar number 7, I believe, of 2023 BTI Live, our series of webinars and industry panels talking about the things that really matter to you, life science tools companies. And so today we are here to talk about one of the things that was really highly requested by our cohort, which is talking about non-dilutive funding. So grants and other non-dilutive opportunities. And today to talk about this, we're going to do this a little differently from how we usually do our webinar. So today we have 2 of our BioTools Innovator alumni from 2021 cohort, the first cohort, and from the 2022 cohort, our second cohort. Both are very experienced with writing and have successfully received grants. And so they're here today to help share from their experience, their advice. But today, as I mentioned, we would like to do this a little bit differently. Even though this is a webinar format, I'd like the cohort today to participate as well. And we'll throw back some of the questions to you to hear from your experience as well. I know some of us here have applied for and were successfully awarded non-dilutive funding and other grants. And so we would like to have you participate, add from your experience, and we will, of course, make this recording available and even summarize that and send that around for our cohorts this year and before so that it's made available to everyone. And so feel free to join and participate. And so without further ado, let's start and get to know our panelists. So I will start with Martis, who's right next to me in the Zoom window. So hi, Martis. How about you introduce yourself, your background, and your company?
Yeah, I'm Markus Coles. I'm the Chief Business Officer for Cipher. My background is a molecular biologist, developmental biologist that loved genomics and studying transcription factors in grad school and postdoc. After that, I joined with Cipher and helped them kind of establish a funding pathway through non-dilutive funding. Cipher is an epigenetics technology company. We touch a lot of different technologies ranging from biochemistry to genomics, focused on anything that interacts with chromatin. And so using that, we're in Research Triangle Park. We've been around for about 10 years and we're about 60 employees now. But we've really relied heavily on non-dilutive funding to help, and NIH specifically, to help us take high risk, high reward opportunities and turn them into product. And so happy to chat with you all today and share our the good and bad of using the approach and how to steer away from making maybe similar mistakes that we made.
Thank you. Thank you. That's why you're here. We would love to hear all that. All right. And then let's jump right next to Catherine. Catherine, go ahead. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. So my name is Catherine Adelkofer and I'm from Germany. I'm one of the Europeans who applied at the BioTool Innovator Award. My background is I'm a molecular biologist by training. I'm a little bit older than you, but I did during my diploma, I actually worked on transcription factors, octamer transcription factors. So we have something in common, but that was a long time ago. My focus is actually on cells. So I'm a cell biologist by training, did my PhD at the ETH in Zurich, did a postdoc at the Salk Institute, and then I went into industry like everybody. And I had a lot of station, worked for Evotech. Some of you might know Evotech. It's a big service business, but now doing their own drug discovery. They didn't want to have me as a scientist, so I actually moved into business. So started my business development career, and then merger and acquisition. This is what I was trained for. I started a couple of companies. I worked for a cluster agency for several German regions. And then since 2012, I invested into a couple of biotech and health companies. We did some good exits, and then I found the Cellbox. And Cellbox is a company which has existed since 6 years. And we are focusing on transporting cells alive. It is very easy. It's a portable incubator, which is holding the temperature and the CO2. And instead of freezing the cells down, you transport them alive. And we are focusing on the cell and gene therapy market. We are very happy. We got a training at the BioTools Innovator for pitching. And then after that, we actually started pitching for the EIC. This is one of the biggest or the biggest grant for a small and mid-sized entity. And after a very hard work, actually, we won. And that is very important for our company. And I'm happy to share all the efforts we had and what you can do actually to get these kind of grants. Yeah.
Thank you both for being here and sharing from your experience. Right before we dive into talking about grants and non-dilutive funding, maybe just if there are any updates you want to give about the company. I know, Catherine, you kind of touched on this with the grants. Any other updates on Cellbox since you graduated from BioTools Innovator?
Yeah, since we graduated, exactly. So first we got the fund, which is a $2.5 million non-refundable grant, but it also has an equity component of $6 million, which is sharing. So they actually, so when an investor is investing, they give the same amount. So it's $1 to $1. Up to 6 million, which actually is very good for us to ask for money from the private sector, from venture capital. We actually are moving our company, so we have an Inc., but we actually will start working at Wake Forest at Winston-Salem. I don't know, it's in North Carolina. It's a regenerative medicine hub, which we love. And we feel quite, like attracted to this hub. And we are going to move there with our logistic services. And we are coming over this year, I think twice, to set up our entity and to grow our first service hub in the US.
Big news. Thank you, Catherine. And Markus, how about you? Any news on updates in Ciphers? What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, we keep growing. That's been good. I mean, the non-dilutive funding strategy is still working, and we're still been successful there. We continue to expand into genomic markets. We're kind of approaching different modalities of measuring different types of things on chromatin. But I think the things that we learned from the BioTools that was helpful was pitching. And we've been having lots of discussions about fundraising, and we've actually found we're in the middle of a late stage, of actually doing one of our first major raises, which I thank BioTools for helping us kind of focus our ideas and where to focus our strengths in the story. But so we'll hopefully be announcing something in the later fall as this wraps up.
We will be on the lookout for these news. All right, so let's talk about non-dilutive funding. Markus, how about we start with you? I know for you, this is in my head and quietly, I call him the poster boy for non-dilutive funding in biotools. And so tell us a little bit, you actually use this as a strategy to fund a lot of the company activity. So tell us a little bit about your strategy.
Yeah, maybe it's just kind of like how we got into it. So we were founded 10 years ago, and it was basically 3 academic founders kind of knowing that they needed to make technology for epigenetic, chromatin science folks. And so our foundational technology was on histone peptides. And basically they emptied out their freezers too. So we're selling weird antibodies. We're kind of a reagents business was the pitch. And we found out pretty fast that the histone peptide technology was flawed and there was an issue with it. And so kind of the 2 options were try to raise, and it was a bad time to raise. Bad time to raise on reagents, right? We didn't really have our story mixed up. And so we started thinking about, SBIR as a mechanism, but we knew then that recombinant nucleosome technology was going to be important for the epigenetic field to advance. And so we started building, and that was when I came in for Ciphers, building a grant strategy around how do we take that innovation, how do we apply it into for SBIR dollars, and we were successful. And so the way that we've been leveraging it is, we kind of look at it as in 3 phases: is build the thing, so build biochemical tools. We then also have genomic tools, and then there's applications, and they all work together in a system. And we try to, and so that is the goal of what Cipher does. It's bridging biochemical tooling into genomic tooling, quantitative tooling, all together. But at the end of the day, it's not about building a fast car. It's about doing something with that. So we'll have application-focused grants as well as we apply into cell gene therapy space, into mechanism of action, small molecule space, biomarker discovery. But each one of those can be separate ideas because there's unique innovations and developments that need to happen. And so that's kind of, we take a broad strategy to try to help, and we focus it really on the central mission of the business, because it's really important to, early on, we made mistakes of getting money any way you can, which sometimes you just have to do that. But I think ultimately, we figured out a way to align the grants to our business strategy so that they're one and the same. And that has really made a big difference in our success, because we're not running around chasing our tails, just doing grant deliverables with no commercial end, is that the commercial end is the product we wanted to make.
And that's a really, really important point, and one of the questions we have, even from our cohort, but just in general. And we'll get to talking about this a little bit. Catherine, for you, a little bit later. Sorry, Catherine, for you, this hasn't been very different, right? In the way Cellbox runs itself, you've been operating mostly out of equity that you've raised. What is your approach to non-dilutive funding? How did you kind of came about this, and is this something that you see as part of your strategy moving forward?
So I think, first of all, it's really interesting, and I have a lot of questions regarding the funding in the US. But in Europe, it is not that easy. So there's not so much funding available. Of course, consortium, very innovative driven. But then if you're a company who needs to focus on the business, first of all, we always looked at what do we need, to bring our business to the market. And then, of course, you cannot, of course, there's so many things you would like to address and do research on. And being a research by training, of course, you think, maybe we can do this and this. So in our hand, since we didn't have all the funding to start with, we had to focus very much on working on the product and bringing the product to the market. Nevertheless, of course, funding is extremely important, because it also evaluates, not everybody gets funding. So it goes through a very, straight and intensive evaluation. Someone is then saying this is really has a value, that funding is appropriate. And for investors, for example, they want to see funding. Without funding, They believe that you are worth nothing, and you are not innovative enough. So that's why it always has a combination. We had a funding at the very beginning, a small funding, which is like from Germany, from even a region, and it's coming from EU, but it is not such very significant funding. But that helped us to convince also investors of saying, oh, it seems to be very innovative that a government is giving money. And then, of course, now, we were ready to say, I don't know how this is working in the US, but here we don't get funding, 100% funding as a SME. We only get 60%. So that means the other 40 has to come from your own budget, either from revenues or from money you have on your bank account. And therefore, when we had enough money to apply for a grant, like the EIC, it's appropriate that the whole project is over 3.5 million, but we only get 2.5 million funding. So the rest has to come from us. And that's why you have to. We cannot apply for something else, because also they look very carefully on who is working on which project, and you cannot assign two people on two different grants. So it's very, and we European are very precise, and this is why there's not so much opportunity. But it is very important to apply for funding, because it evaluates you.
And thank you. I think it is, even here, everywhere you go, it's just that validation, that early validation that you have, as you said, funding from government agencies, from your region, whatever it is. Let's maybe pull on that thread. You mentioned a grant that you got early on. Let's kind of go with the non-dilutive funding for dummies in Europe. So if you're a tools company, early stage in Europe, France, Germany, usually our companies, and I look back at our 3 cohorts, we have about 30% of companies that are from Europe or the area, Middle East. And so how did you go about finding grant opportunities in Europe? And it might be different from Germany to other places, but how do you kind of go about finding these opportunities? And we'll have the same question for Marty later, of course.
Yeah, so actually you have to be EU-wise. They have wonderful platforms where you can look at, and networks, and where you look for your strategy if it fits into. And I know that a lot of companies work, they work in these consortia. So that means like you have a 50 million budget grant. And you as a SME, you are just a part of it, and or you either get subcontracted and you get 100% funding, or you be a part of the whole consortia. And I think it is easy if you go on the EU platforms. In Germany, we have the ministry who is always announcing, and we have special tools. I think it's also in France. I know that it is also in England and the UK, that you have ministries and special for biotech, for medical devices, where you can look for. It's not that difficult. The only thing is that you have to make a decision in which direction. You need to have actually in Europe a funding strategy. You cannot just, and I don't know if this is allowed. It's not allowed in Germany to apply at the same time for 2. I don't know if that is happening the same in the US. You cannot just spread out the good news and then hope that one is coming in. This is not possible. And I don't know how the only thing is, what I want to mention is, I don't know how this is in the US, but in Europe, a lot of bigger companies, they do not apply for grants, because the administration of a grant money in the EU is almost killing you. Until you sign the contract of the grant, all my hair are gray. You know, it is really, it is really hard work. So you have to be very sure to that you need the money and that it really helps you to focus to bring your product to the market.
No, thank you, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But there's definitely there's the cost of this opportunity, right, and the opportunity cost of what other things you could be doing with your time. So it's definitely an important point. I'll turn this question to Markus to tell us, how would you go about specifically for a tools company? You know, it's easier to find. I can imagine it's easier to find grants when you are, and I've worked with multiple SBIR funded companies in different areas, different verticals and different industries. The subset of grants that would be appropriate for tools companies is obviously smaller. How did you go about finding grants, and what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, I have some hopefully helpful suggestions. I want to talk to two things Catherine mentioned is similar in the US, it is not looked good upon to submit multiple applications on the same idea. So EpiCypher will put in multiple applications a cycle, but they are unique ideas, right? Because yeah, same thing. It's a huge waste of taxpayers. You know, the reviewers, right, are spending time reviewing. I just think from an ethical perspective, like, or ethos, right? It's like, believe in the project and do what you want to do with it.
And specifically, there are guidelines with fraud and abuse, with SBIR
I mean, if you get
funding.
two things funded, you definitely have to tell them. But I think even just from an application perspective, the other thing is that, but like a PI, the one thing that's different, it seems, is that a PI can have multiple grants, right? And that's actually viewed as good. There's almost like you're in the grant club, right? Like they want to know that you've had grants. They want to know that you have active grants, that you've had them in the last year, that you have one going on, that you know how NIH works, you know how to report. So all that'll actually help your investigator score versus being, maybe detrimental. Certain agencies like to spread the money around a little more. Like NIGMS is like that, especially that's the National Institute of, I think it's General Medicine. And as part of an institute within the NIH. But even within that, we find that NIH is incredibly supportive of us. They know, because we have many grants with the NIH right now, and they're aware and they love us, right? And I think it's because we generate stuff, right? NIH is one of our good customers. And so I think there's also this view maybe that there's like gaming the system. I think the system is built to support people who want to submit for funding. And we win that funding because we do good science and we're well positioned to commercialize, right? And so, and NIH sees that we can compete. And so, I just want to kind of lay that out. So, how do we find opportunities? So, I'm super biased towards the National Institute of Health because we're biotools, right? We make tools to improve human health. So just as SBIR, like a small amount of the budget is reserved in the US for business grants, for SBIR grants, all agencies. So CDC, EPA, USDA, DOD, they all have SBIR. So the National Institute of Health is the largest provider of health-driven grants in the US, and they're very well funded. And so I think that's a great place to start. NSF is great for the beginning. I will say that NSF is more like EU. You're going to get one grant with NSF, but they will take risks on early. So sometimes the NIH can be a little bit more like, show me what you've done lately type of a thing. So I think I would recommend, if people are literally like, you are an idea with two founders and you literally are at that very early stage, the NSF can be a nice way. The awards are just smaller. So the way I would get organized is read the omnibus for NIH. Now I'm talking about is read that through and make sure that you're okay. That makes sense for your business. Another way I do it is I look at the study sections. So if you type in NIH SBIR study sections, you'll get the top hit will be a list of the study sections, and read through them all. And you'll look at what they're looking for. And for EpiCypher, there's 4 or 5 study sections that just read super strong. So that's how we're building proposals, is we're building based on what the Because if you you're going to have to send to a study section. That study section is going to be staffed with scientists with certain expertise. You have to be able to speak to them. So if your topic is not well framed, even if it's brilliant, people won't get it, right? You can't have a person who's a chemist and then you're trying to tell them about biology. They might not appreciate, right? So you got to be telling the right story to the right person. So when we have a biochemical, we know what study section to go to and we send it there so it can be received appropriately, versus if we have a diagnostic type of application, because, you know, a hardcore mass spectrometrist isn't going to be able to appreciate, you know, biomarker discovery, maybe in the nuance, right, of the innovation and the significance. So the other thing to do is go on an NIH Reporter. It's an amazing resource. You can look at similar projects, so you can type in topics and find it. What I really like to look at too is how much money is available. So you can type in R44 is the code for a phase 2, and R43 is a code for phase 1. You can search those and find by agency what the max budgets are. And there's, you know, so we in NIH, I think, would agree is they want you to ask for, I think they want to hand out, it's in their interest, right, to find the best companies and give them as much money as possible. So sometimes, you know, it says the cap is 750, but you can really ask for 1.25 million. And so it becomes really helpful knowing that, so that you're not leaving stuff on the table, right? And it really, that just ends up becoming, it's not more money, you just draw a bigger scope, right? The project becomes bigger and more interesting, and you build the project to the scope. Let me see. And then there are targeted applications. So outside the omnibus, there are targeted applications that are from each agency, and I recommend looking through those. Those are on if you go to the SBIR NIH Omnibus, Google that, you'll have a hit. And then under that, they'll have a list of the targeted solicitations. And then there's also contracts. We've never done contracts, and it's because we're not a good fit for them. But that doesn't mean your business wouldn't be. They're very targeted. They're more on diagnostic and point of care devices. We don't play well in that space. We're more of a research tool and genomics, you know, more discovery based biomarker discovery. So, but I know I do have friends of other companies that people have been really successful with contracts. And there's lots of them from the NIH, and they actually just got released last week with a deadline in like November 15th or something.
Thank you for all these tips. I think one of the things we would like to do after this is kind of take all this information and put this in the form of a list of resources for our companies and for previous cohorts as well. I think this is, you know, there's always place for more funding, especially if it really aligns with what you do in your commercialization and your business goals, which we'll talk about in a minute. Before we kind of move on to other things, I'd like to ask our cohort to participate. I'd like to throw this back at our cohort, this question, and talk about maybe grants that you were able to find or strategies that you have in finding the right non-dilutive funding opportunities in the US and outside of it. And so I'll give everyone a second to raise hands. Let me look out here. I know some of the people here have been successful in getting some grants, not necessarily NIH, by the way, in the US. I know, and this is something I can kind of bring up as I wait for people to speak up. I know some of our companies have been successful in raising money from NSF, as you mentioned. I agree. You know, NSF is a little less. You know, is a little more open to taking risk on earlier stage basic science applications and so research. And so some of our companies have been successful in raising money through NSF, some through even NIST, depending on what you're working on and what is your technology. Some through DARPA. I know, again, more of the basic research applications. DARPA has been funding really interesting things. And then BARDA, one of our partners, actually, we're part of an accelerator network that works closely with BARDA. And so BARDA also funds applications, mostly in the health security area, in pandemic preparedness and so on and so forth, and has funded several biotools companies from our cohorts and other tools companies that were outside of biotools innovator. And so there are multiple opportunities. It's about where to find them and kind of continue to look through. In the US, it's very simple. Really, the SBIR database is publicly available. We will add this to the list of resources. Pretty easy to find these specific opportunities. And as Markus mentioned, there are other targeted grants. You could see, for example, on the BARDA website, you could find the targeted RFPs that they put out. For a lot of them will actually cover some of the tools companies, and relevant for a lot of our technologies. I see a raised hand. Let's try to, Ari, can you try to bring, oh, I don't know what happened. Let's see. Something happened. I think John's hand was up, right?
John's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, John.
So I have been really fortunate to raise funds, SBIRs, both for an antibody startup that I had many years ago, as well as our new BioTools instruments. I think one of our philosophies, at least as we got more mature, is that we never really wrote phase 1 grants.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote mostly straight to phase 2 or fast track grants. And we were able to get both of those. Again, once with an antibody company that I was running, and now this one. I think the most important aspect is really talking to program managers and understanding what they're looking for. So if you're writing an SBIR, for example, to NCI, they have really a different want and need. And if you really get good in with the people, talk with them, here's what I'm writing, here's what I'm thinking, and getting their feedback before you submit, I think the chances, at least in my experience, have been much better than just going in cold with a proposal. So get to know the people that you're going to submit to the study section. And I think what we discussed earlier is really knowing your study sections and your institutes. I think that's so critical. So you're at least get that scored so it doesn't come back not discussed, which is always the most depressing thing when you get that back.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. That we especially early reached out a lot to kind of to ask those questions. I think the other part is making sure that your team is well set too. We leverage collaborations a lot as ways and bring in collaborators. And we found that to be really, really useful, because especially a lot of the reviewers for SBIR are academics. And I just feel like they feel more comfortable like propping up the other, right? And we give good subcontracts. It's not just like a, menial 5-10K consulting, when we do legitimate work with that. I would say that I think it's been really beneficial to we do this with KOLs, right? People that are in the space that we think would matter. We found that that also helped, and it also builds the team and builds credibility early, right? Because and I also like the idea of, if you've got data, this is another reason to bring in academics too. They have a lot of data. So if you've got some on-point data and somebody else is bringing in some on-point data, that's a lot of what I do, is I build collaborations and teams before, and then those grants crush, right? If you've got a great idea, you've got data, you've got a team, there's expertise, everybody, it's like that's a home run almost every time, as long as the grantsmanship, right? Which then it's just boxing it up and putting together a good story. But we always say too is that good grants get funded. Is that bad ideas, right, that are half thought and whatever, it's like, but good grants do get funded, right, if they're structured right. So yeah, great suggestion.
Thank you, John. Catherine, yes.
I actually have a question regarding, when you collaborate with academia. So how do you deal with, that eventually you will have patents which you badly need, for your, for your product, especially, for example, in Europe, European funding, they always want to see patents, and in this consortia where you work with academia in Europe, they're very precise where the patent belongs to. And this is definitely not clear that it belongs to the company. They actually, the universities in Europe or in Germany, they want to protect their own IP. I don't know how this is working, when you all collect your academia.
Yeah, I think it's setting expectations and having that direct conversation. It's just as if you start a science collaboration, right? Authorship and what's happening and who's running the project, that all that gets laid out. We do the same thing. So if we bring an idea, the invention's already done, right? If we have an idea that we're going to develop this thing, we've already invented it, we're bringing it to the collaborator. And we also don't let them do things that could invent. So when it comes to building it and optimizing it and all the things that we need to learn, we usually do all of that in-house. When it comes to applying it into a cell line or a disease model, an application, right, of like something really cool, right, that's going to make an awesome Nature paper or something like that, like we let them do that. So, but I agree, you have to be really careful on how you structure collaborations, because we have had, especially early, dealing with some of the, especially like universities in the Northeast, can be pretty aggressive as it comes to IP. And you have to be really careful, right? So yeah, just don't let them develop. And then also it's just, there's language too, right? That if it's, usually we set up the agreements so that there's background IP, right? Like we have background IP, we own everything that is an invention on our background IP. If the inventor has something really cool that they do, that's their stuff. And any invention that goes on that is theirs. And then anything that's mixed is joint. So you can also parse it that way. And we've been successful setting up the agreements that they're structured so that the universities can't have too much reach through into the IP, because it absolutely needs to stay with the business, right? If otherwise, yeah, it's not worth it.
Thank you. And I want to jump to kind of a different topic within this, maybe kind of leading to what you were talking about. What can be funded with these grants that you are describing? So what kind of work can you find? What can't you fund? There were questions about overhead, questions about other things that can or can't be funded, R&D specifically, what can or can't be funded. And it might be different with the different types of grants. You described applications, grants in Europe might be something a little bit different. Maybe let you kind of, Catherine, maybe start with your experience on what can or can't be funded. And I see, Ryan, I see your hand raised. We will get to you right after this question.
Yeah, actually, the most important thing is that if a product is in the market, it can't be funded. So in Europe, we have this very clear that it has to be research. And so they have applications where you can work until a prototype. But then after that, it is getting more and more difficult, and they call it so for example, in the EU and the EIC grant is the death valley, where you actually do not get fundamental research anymore, because you are like we have this technical readiness level. I don't know if you have that. It's a TRL.
TRL. Yeah.
7, and until then you can get fundamental funding, but then if it progresses, there are some grants where you progress into TRL 8, but from 8 to 9 there's no funding, then it's equity. You have to, so this is in Europe very clear, And for, you know, in Germany, for example, they make sure that they fund a very, very risky projects. So if you have a project which is not risky, they do not fund it. And you have to put it in a way that nobody from the private sector would ever fund it because it's too risky. And this is it stands above everything. And so you have to, you know, whatever you explore, you have to make sure that there is a certain risk, and this is why you are asking for grant money. You know, fundamental research, very exploratory, high risk. This is what actually gets funded. But just to bring something to the market, it is actually it's not allowed even in Europe to fund that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Markus, how has your experience been with that?
Yeah, it's a lot different here. I think the focus at NIH at least is more on innovation, right? So and I, you know, as to Catherine's question about like you have a product. So we submit a lot of grants on, like, we have I'll just, because these words aren't going to mean anything to you guys, but like we have this cut and tag kit, which is a genomic mapping kit that has certain specs, right? But there's uses for this kit to be used in single cell and spatial. And so we've written and been successful writing grants that are focused on, okay, to get this ready, you know, we already have the kit, right? And it's selling great, right? And we show that in our commercial plan that, like, you know, that we have commercial adoption, this is great. But what we need to do is focus on this part of the kit. And if we do that, we can get it to this single cell application, which opens up this whole new market, right? And bigger piece of the pie, and, you know, will be good for research. And we've been successful doing that. So I've seen other people, just reading some other grants that I thought was a fantastic idea. They were like, you know, in the first phase 2, we developed the tech. In this next phase 2, we're going to kit it. And they got it. They got another $2 million to basically extend a phase 2, which they already had funding for $2 million, but they didn't get to kitification. They got to, you know, because they had a lot of work to do, right? It was a complicated technology. They had to work out this is in the genomic space, bioinformatics and all that stuff. But now they were like, so even though they technically were to market with like an early prototype, they were like, no, we need to harden this thing and make it scalable and get into these new markets. And that works. I would say is what gets funded is research and development.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way it works is all NIH companies, all SBIR companies get 40% indirect. So for every dollar we spend, we get 40 cents indirect. And then we get a 7% fee that we get. So we get a 7% fee on the $1.40. So it ends up being, what is that? It's like $1.50, right? Mm-hmm. That we get for, you know, we get 50 cents on the back end of every direct dollar. And so when we say, you know, it was a $2 million award, that's total funds, including mm-hmm. direct F&A and unallowed. The F&A, the indirect.
Can you expand a little bit on that, specifically on that 7% fee? I know some of our companies had a question about this in SBIR grants, and what exactly does it mean? What is it? How do you kind of account for it, and what can you use it for?
Yeah, you can use it for everything. It's profit. So the direct is R&D. So I always think it's like scientists, equipment, and supplies. Indirect is everything that supports that. So that's the building, the electricity, your computers. If you spent money on grant writing, accounting, management, you know, all that other stuff, right? Executives, they don't like, right, so much like executive management. But if you happen to be an executive and you're managing the program, which happens in small businesses, that is also okay. And then the 7% fee. So then there's like this unallowed bucket, which is sales, marketing, and patents, and anything that has to do with like the real commercial. So the fee can be used for that. That's why I think it's really important. A lot of times when people contract out grant writing, they'll do a success fee that takes the fee, right? So they'll say, hey, if I win you this grant, you're going to get 7%, but I'm going to take 5% of that 7%. Well, it sounds great, but it can be really dangerous because that 7% is blood money, kind of, you know, I mean, use a bad term, but, you know, it's very important money to be used you know, because that's the stuff to file your patents and to make some strategic, well, you know, especially when cash is low if you don't have availability. So it's something to really think about, but it has there are no ties. It is straight profit.
And I'll maybe kind of pull on that string to ask you also, has that changed with the Taba funds that are given specifically for commercialization? Because I know you can't use that with the actual R&D chunk of the grant.
Taba is if you imagine, Taba can be used to spend money on unallowed type of things, but a certain subset of unallowed things. You can't go buy a new car with Taba money, but you could buy a new car, right, with the fee, right? Like you can do whatever you want. Funder can take it and put it in their pocket if they want, right? It's profit. But Taba needs to be spent on certain things. So this is technical and business assistance funds. We use them for marketing contractors, for business contractors. So we have a bunch of consultants that are helping on the fringe, and so Taba supports a lot of that. We buy market reports with Taba, and we write it into every grant, and it ends up being very significant with the awards we have. Being able to have funds, we actually can buy market reports, and I've never been able to because I just always thought they were absurdly expensive. But Taba has strings. It definitely, you can't, there's a box that it fits in, and you can't go outside that box.
But that's additional to the fee, and so there's no, and you just have to apply to it.
And that's on top of the award too.
Right.
So
exactly.
if NCI says your top award's $1 million, but you can apply for up to 25,000 a year in Taba, both years up to a 50,000 cap. So your total award is actually $1,025,000. Yeah.
And that way you don't have to throw your 7% fee on the marketing and commercialization aspect of it. And so really important to pay attention. If you don't apply, you will not get it. So you'd have to ask for this when you're applying for the grant, and it's available. So
just if you do mess up, which some people do, there is a mechanism that NIH is trying to get people. So go talk to your program officer. If you didn't put it in there, but you got an award, there is a mechanism to kind of backfill people for you know, the folks that were funded. So there are mechanisms. It's not all lost, but it's not going to be, you have to apply back in and justify it.
Good to know.
Yeah, but there is a mechanism to help you out if you missed it.
Yeah, good to know. All right, so I'd like to bring Ryan up to ask a question, which will also kind of segue us to the next part of the discussion. But I also know Ryan has a lot of experience with grant writing and success in being awarded. And so Ryan, let's see if you can we hear Ryan? Let's see. There we go. You should be able to. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so just for background, I used to write my PI's old grants for them, and they were successful after I started writing them. And then I have 15 and another 5 pending or in progress. And my biggest problem right now is admin and reporting. So I've got a lot of reporting to do. And then
Ryan, can you expand a little bit on what grants have you been able to secure? What have you found to be really high value opportunities in non-dilutive funding? What types of things would you recommend others here to explore?
I mean, we've done like this. I did like a state funding grant in a couple of them when I was in Australia for the state of New South Wales. I have a federal non-dilutive funding scheme for our subsidiary down there called the R&D Tax Incentive. I've got a handful of NIH grants. I've applied to the NSF before, but they said we had too much money. And then I honestly, this sounds kind of weird, but I guess I'm answering my own question here. But one of the best things that we can do is just write peer-reviewed publications on our results, and you can just copy and paste all that content into your report or into your your next grant application. And then the other thing is all of our customers, they that's like our number one source of revenue is our peer-reviewed publications, and they don't even have to be like Nature ones. They can be like scientific reports or whatever. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I've got I think 7 million in over 7 million in non-dilutive funding, and then we have another 10 million pending. And it's been a huge resource, especially when getting started, and then when during markets, during kind of bear markets like now. So I guess I don't know, how do you guys manage your admin and reporting? Because like updating my SAM thing every year has become kind of a pain in the butt if you factor in the census reporting and all your FFPPR or whatever it's called, and that kind of thing. So and then if you're the only person who can do all that it feels like you have to be CEO and also a grant reporter.
So
I'm going to let, go ahead, Catherine.
I can tell you. So what we hired someone, we are not able. So in our reporting, we need someone who is doing the project management and the reporting. But that is again European, because we report basically every day. I have the feeling, and it is. And the problem, I don't know how this is happening in the US, but if you do not report correctly, you even have to pay back the money. So it is really you have to be extremely precise of how you use the money. There are grants which is more easy, but if it comes to the EU grants, they are really, you have to report, and that's why we have someone who is dealing with our grants and who is doing the reporting and helping us to write, because it's a full-time job actually. He's also doing the project management of the grants. Yeah,
well, I mean, I still do it. I think one of the other problems that has arisen is like the people who give you the money, they want to see the impact that the grant has had.
Yes.
After the funds have been exhausted. And they're like, oh, we need you to give us an update on the progress report. And I was like, well, that's going to take me 3 business days to do. So that's however many hours of my time. And there's no more money left to support that. So that's been
Can I ask one question, which is really intriguing me, is, when I hear all that and I listen to the speaker before, I have the feeling that you really, grow companies by grants. It's like, and in the US, you have the capability to apply for grants, which is bringing you towards the product, or even defining the product even better by using grant money. In Europe, this is not that easy. This is really a big difference, in which, if people always talk about European company versus US company, I start having the feeling, because we always say that it's because the investors, that the investor in the US are more risky, and the funding, the venture capitalists, they are, whenever you want to do biotech, you need to go to the US. I have the feeling that it's not the investors, it's actually the way companies get grant money and can move forwards until they prove that their product is really that innovative that investors actually participate. I don't know, but
it is definitely a strategy. Sorry, it is definitely a strategy in the earlier stages here. It's very common to do some of your validation work through non-dilutive funding. This is what it's here for, right? The NSF called it like the Seed Fund of America, right? It's really that to support the earlier stages. But I think, to your question, Ryan, about the administration of and the management of the grants and the reporting, I think that is, as you mentioned, Catherine, I think it's common in Europe, but it's also a requirement here. It's pretty well known. There's a very specific set of requirements for reporting. I want to have Markus weigh in here on managing grants and managing reporting over the years, given the number of grants that you've been working with.
Yeah, I think one thing that we did that worked for us, I don't know if it worked for other businesses, but we've kind of treated the grants as a segment of the business, right? So like our PIs, the investigators who are doing the stuff, aren't writing the grants, right? We have grant writing staff, right? That does that. I also have reporting staff, right? So the grant writing staff has two jobs. One is work with the scientists to develop and mature the ideas, bring in collaborators, right? And kind of set up all the pre-stuff that goes into a project. We need to pilot projects. It's getting the buy-in from science to pilot and all that. But then they also project manage all of the phase 1s and the phase 2s. But it ends up, I think, to Ryan's thing, is that it is, you have to be very careful. It's a project management nightmare if you let it run away, because before you know it, 9 months are gone and your scientists are scientists. They chase the ball, but that isn't necessarily what you said you were going to do. And so we usually do quarterly meetings with our scientists where we check in, we see what's going on. We're always attending any of the science meetings, and we have a fly on the wall that's watching and making sure that like they stay on task, right? Because any R&D, if they're doing good R&D, you're following leads and just going down. But sometimes you let that run for 6 months and all of a sudden they've completely, are they moving away from the spirit of the aim, right? Now, and with these grants, these are grants, they're not contracts, right? And so, but I always tell them, it's like, it has to be in the spirit of the idea. Like, you can't say you're gonna validate a product and then you just went and did something completely different. Like, it has to be something, it has to be themed, right? So we do it by breaking it out. I feel like the companies that I know that really struggled with this is where they put that on their science staff. And that's challenging, because then basically the people that should be in the lab doing the work are inundated, because oftentimes brilliant scientists are not fast writers, but fast writers, like, once you have a team of people, I have staff, they don't have to spend 3 days. The idea is to make the reporting streamlined, because they know exactly what the reporting is. They've done it many times. So they work with the scientists, and they just basically, we get data packages from them. And then there's one meeting to kind of bang out, like, what was the story? And then we report it. And then, the scientists will read it, right? And make sure it's right. But so it's basically delegation across, instead of having the PIs have the burden, or it sounds like what you're doing, right, is kind of having the top doing it as well. And it's challenging, very hard, because you're the one that knows what's going on, because you're probably involved with all the projects. And so it's just how to manage that, but it can be managed through project managers. That's how we do it.
We did,
Which
I did the first 10 myself, and then we switched to using a consultant. And Nick, you said they can kind of eat away at that success fee. I have another one of my friends with an angel invested in, and they have a CSO who does it, but they used our consultant first to get good at it. And then they switched over to all internal. So I think if you are a solo founder, having the consultant is great. And then we just had a discussion with them on how they're going to take the project management out of my hands, because if they want all these success fees, they got to start doing, they want me to do my job, and they want to do the admin. So that's kind of what we're going through right now. But yeah, I would say, like, I don't know. I think there's like a debate on consultant or no consultant. If you have like a PI or like a CSO, then great, you don't need a consultant. But if you don't have one and you're a solo founder, you 100% need a consultant if you're going to run a business and with non-dilutive funding.
And Catherine, how do you do this now with such a big grant? At least your recent one. Do you do it yourself? Do you manage all the reporting yourself with in-house, or do you bring on consultants to help you manage this?
Actually, these kind of grants, you even don't make it if you don't have a consultant. So this is the bad news, actually. And for these big EU grants, I think no one makes it without a consultant. So if now someone from the EU Commission is listening, they kill me, because it is actually officially not allowed. But there are tons of consultancy who specialized on this one program because it is worth it, and they actually get they get some money in advance, and then they get, depending on how much money you get, they get a so-called, I don't know, they get a provision for that. I don't know anybody who actually ever won these kind of grants who did it without a consultant. So when you after you win this, then of course, in the moment I'm heading the project until we signed the grant, and then I hand it over to the project leader, and they do the reporting. They make sure that the scientists are going in the direction they need to go. They try to keep the whole team together. Here, this is not like your grant you described, which is like focusing on one direction, the other one is focusing on the other direction. This grant actually is in the direction that the whole company is following a certain path to bring the product to the market and then expand the business worldwide. So it's a whole positioning of the whole company, and that makes it a little bit more tricky. The grants which we have, which are focusing maybe to specialize on a certain tool, they actually get managed by the head of the grant application scientists. So this is how we actually do it. The big ones, it is an executive effort, and the smaller ones, they get then into the teams distributed. So this is how we structure it.
Thank you. Let's maybe dive in a little bit more to talking about outsourcing some of these things, maybe even earlier in this process, writing. I know, Markus, you mentioned you have grant writers on fee basically doing this. And so first of all, any pros and cons to using to outsourcing this, the grant writing, the grant management, anything that you'd like to kind of recommend or disrecommend to our companies? And then if you have names, recommendations of services or consultants specifically that you use and think would be beneficial for others.
Yeah. So I think initially it's good to write them yourself. If you have, as everybody's been kind of saying that, like, if you have the expertise to write them. We started where our founder wrote the first ones, and we always joke that they were like terrible grants, but they got funded, right? And we had consultants. So we had like a consultant that was kind of helping us, and then we had a writer. But I think eventually, I really like having the writing internal, because what we've established is an innovation team at EpiCypher that all we think about is innovation, right? So when we have like lab meeting once a week, we still do, right? The whole company comes together and we look at data and we do that. But I'm looking at it through, and my whole team is looking at it through the lens of, just looking at everything on its head, because the scientists are looking at it within their project. And I think that we have stumbled across multiple new ideas using this approach where and it comes from the innovation team. It doesn't come from our science team. It comes from folks that are away from it, and they're just looking at the data and be like, what if we could do this? We've also taken data several times where we generated data for one purpose, we repackaged it and got a direct to phase 2 the other way. I think that's all a strength to the way that we're structured, but it has some costs associated with it, right? Where initially it was me. I was the grant writer and was writing and managing, just as Ryan was saying, like this to everything, right? I was an early employee at EpiCypher, and I was, built the system. But eventually, and I used contractors to help when I needed to write 3 grants, and I could only write 2, right? In a cycle or something, right? Then I would bring in people. But once we had the capabilities and we grew it to a stage, once I could bring in a writer, I have, and I think it's just a great idea. And again, as Ryan was saying, I played project manager. So I'd have a writer who was writing and I was playing project manager and I was doing all the reporting. And then now the team sits on its own, right? It's more of an independent thing. But I would still say, and I think to Catherine's point, that it's an executive. You do not want your reporting to get out of your control. I look at and report and give feedback on every single status report. And even, because you have to take it very seriously. The last thing you want to do is screw up reporting. The NIH has been really good to us, and we try to do strong reporting back to them. But yeah, you can farm it out anyway, either internal or external, but it needs to definitely go through. I think an executive needs to be approving. But I think that there's lots of good vendors out there. If I was to pay somebody to do a grant, I would pay them outright. But again, I have money to do that. So I understand why people do fee, a success fee upon the back end, and they take it off the fee in the US. It's a typical thing. I think you just have to be careful on that. People will do it, like almost give you free grants, but then they take the 7%. So, you can maybe pay somebody $10,000 to $15,000 to write a grant for you. But if you give them 5% of a success fee, that's on $1 million grant, you're paying them $50,000 if they get it. You just have to be careful, how that works. And free money sounds great until you actually have to pay the person, or entity or whatever, right? So I just think that there are ways to do it, and I would prefer to do flat rate paying or a good rate payer to the grant writer with a small success versus the inverted where it's, you're basically not paying them, but then they just rake it all in when you win, because they will win. I mean, it's in the US, they say 25% success, but I think if you know how to write a good grant, it's probably 30-40% success. So I think if you have a story and it is highly innovative, they will be successful. You just have to assume that they're going to win, right? And then you're going to have to pay that really high fee.
We pay a success fee for ours, but I have 100% success rate for the past 5 years. So our grant writers always write my grants first, which is great.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, but and I get, they do my reporting for me too. I'm like, success fee report, please.
Can I
Yes, Catherine.
So grant writer, this is something which is also, very new to me. So we. Can I get these? So that's actually not common in Europe, or maybe if there's someone from the cohort telling me that we do have the same. So we identify people who have the capability and the knowledge of writing grants, but they are not easy to find. They're really not easy to find. And they are not, like, oh, I have a grant writer, someone who, it is someone, if you find someone, they're horrible expensive, Of course, they are paid, as you said, either, this direction or that, but it is not common. So normally the grant writing is done in-house, but the consultancy, I was talking about, they do not write the grant. They help you to put the right wording, that you have equality, that you have all the gender, that you have everything written down, the percentage, the VSOPs, so they look for that you wrote the right, you never used a word which is not, which you're not allowed to use. So they help you in streamlining the grant, but they don't write it to you, they don't write it. So you have to do that by yourself. I moved to the US, I guess. Okay.
We used one. So one I did 10 myself, and then those were all 10 successful ones myself. There's more than unsuccessful ones in that. But then we tried a consultant and they didn't do a very good job. And then we found one that worked out pretty well. And then because we've done a number of projects with them, it's pretty easy. Like all of the ancillary documents, like your bio sketch, like those are all done. And then they already know us. So I just have if a really tight grant writing process, I'll just have 2 meetings with them, and then I'll review 2 documents, review the aims and then the grant, and then it's done. So it's really easy. But now it feels like they get a lot of money every time we win. So I guess it's a trade-off, but whatever, it works well.
Yeah.
To maybe pull on that a little bit, you mentioned something about the formatting, putting the right documents, the right all of that goes into a grant. Has any of you ever used? I know in the US it's pretty common. There are all kinds of tools, the Turbo SBIRs and similars, that would not write the grant for you, but kind of help you DIY your grant formatting or the grant requirements, would make sure you have your checklist of everything that you need. Have you ever used any of these
Yeah, they didn't submit it on time.
services? Mhm.
Yeah.
And your experience have been good with this?
Our experience with the full service grant writers has been great. Our experience with the kind of the admin people has been less than, I mean, if you don't submit it on time, then that's kind of like the worst outcome.
Marty's anything?
Can I
Sorry.
ask a question? So these
Yeah.
grant writer, you know, this grant writer. So you hire them and you say, oh, listen, I would like to write a grant, and this is the direction I want to move, and then they do the rest, or how do you work with them?
Yeah, normally we'll be talking to our customers. And then, you know, if like 3 say they want the same thing or whatever, then I'll just get 1-page letters of support from them. And then I'll call the grant writer and I'll say, here's like the feature we want to add on, or like the direction we want to go with our science based on what these people want to see. And then we'll just, if they're not willing to give us $500,000 service agreement, then I'll just apply for an SBIR grant and get it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Marty's, anything to add to that? How do you
Yeah, I
work
think-
with,
Yeah, and then
I
they get
mean-
careless after you get it though. Like if you get the grant for the project that they wanted, then they give you the service agreement afterwards.
Yeah, that's a very, we do it. Yeah, you're listening to customers, you're getting that. And then again, we also use the grants to forge these collaborations, right? And get them going. And then they usually all turn into revenue as well. I think you're asking the question of like, how do you hire, and what I always tell people that, like, with grant writers, you know, I'm trying to make you so you can start your own company, right? Because I feel like once you know how this game works and how to structure grants, and we have a structure internally that we use, so we don't reinvent the wheel. We kind of know what needs to be said and the innovation and the significance, and we teach that. And so I think the idea is, and so we've seen that grant writers come into our business. Sometimes they stay. We've had them move. They make awesome product managers because they understand the technologies super well. So it's almost like grant writing is a great alternative career for investigators that want to get off the bench. So these are people we usually hire right out of grad school or postdoc. And we find brilliant people that want to use their science mind. And then they either, if some of, like I said, probably about 1 in 5 of them or 1 in 10 of them are actually born writers that want to write. But it's a great way to kind of like get them thinking, understand the business. And our product team is basically a bunch of phased out grant writers that have found their legs in other parts of the business. We have some that have gone into sales. And so we typically, you know, have a grant writer will stay and write grants for 3 years, 4 years. And then either we do have some, like, I love grants. I could write, you know, but I have other things to do. But a lot of times it's a challenging job, but you learn a ton about technology, the business, and then again, like, be an entrepreneur, right? And just being like, you could start your own business tomorrow with the tools you have.
No, I totally agree that writing a grant structures you perfectly on what you actually want to achieve. And you have to, you know, just starting a business without rethinking and writing a grant, I think makes you think of actually what you want to achieve and in which market, and does it really make sense, and to look from all different kind of angles. So I agree that ideally you have these grants to position a company, you know, and but this is really different in the EU, I have to say.
which is why we have you here. We really want to know that side of things as well. And it might be different. I will say, just to kind of put this in the right context, you know, we've heard from other companies in our cohort and outside of it, of course, even on the medtech side, you know, the European side of things, it might be different from country to country. There are the EU grants, the bigger ones. There are smaller ones that are more, you know, regional or governments that are, you know, the government in France has different grants than the one in Germany, than the one in the UK, and so on and so forth. So it could be slightly different, but in the context of what you're talking about, of course, that I want to give people an opportunity. We're almost at time, and I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions. So while we have people please start putting your questions here in the Q&A or chat, or just raise your hand. We're doing this less formally today, and so feel free to raise hands to ask questions. And while we wait for people to kind of come on and ask questions, we've talked about what we should do in this process. Let's talk about what not to do. So mistakes you've made along the way with non-dilutive funding. What would be these mistakes that you'd recommend people to avoid, and how to avoid them? Marty, so let you start.
I think the biggest one is writing grants for stuff, that you could do, or tangent, that we did some grants that were related to what we could do. We knew that they were going to come across very well. I thought we did well in them, but it was very distracting, right? It was like you had this team kind of going out and doing this other arm. And so we did that early. But again, when it's early days, you're getting money. For us, we never received any VC funding. So we did a small friends and family round, and EpiCypher hasn't had anything else. So we were, struggling early to fund the R&D business. But yeah, so I think that was big. The other part is you have to really keep the accounting. Make sure that you hire an accountant that understands SBIR. I mean, the audits aren't as scary as as you think they are, but the reporting's real, and you need to make sure that everything, because that's something I've worked with a lot of companies and helping them kind of get through audits and questions they have, and there's a lot of like, what's there to be. And so I think the best thing is find an accountant that understands how to code and structure the expenses. It's not rocket science. It's not hard. It is work that needs to happen. It's different than you just got an expense and you pay it. It all has to get coded certain ways. But I think just hire an accountant that has the experience and do it right when you get the award. Because the NIH, you're going to hit that 750 threshold and have to report back, and you don't want to have to be scrambling or having massive findings on your audits on your first pass.
Thank you. This is really, really great advice. Catherine, anything from you?
I actually agree that you shouldn't do. So what the experience, if you write a grant and if you look at getting the money, you have to make it right. So I think you have to really think the project through until the end. Otherwise, later on you deal with, if you're not precise from the beginning, at the very end, so here in our cases, you have to know exactly how many people you work with, what is the equipment, and what is the purchases you would like to do in the services. If you don't think that through, at the very end, you're losing money. So I would always advise to really make sure that you have a plan, and that you follow this path. And I also I think that the executive, so if you want to make sure that it is successful, I think you always have to have someone from the executive team, looking at this grant and making sure that it is following the direction of the company, especially if they are smaller and minor. I have the feeling that, don't apply for a grant which actually doesn't help you to grow the company. So you really have to make sure, only because, this sounds really great, let's go in this direction, but it doesn't follow the path of the company. As being a scientist by myself, I love it. I love to think about new ideas, and which probably might not be the right direction for the product. So and I think to have always this view, does it really help to grow the company? I mean, eventually at one point you are in the luxury position that you can just say, we try this and that. As a small entity like we are not. We really have to make sure that we follow this path to go to the market and beyond at growing within other countries. Yeah,
absolutely. I think this is on the other side of it, we hear a lot from investors. The the companies that knows how to utilize non-dilutive funding in a smart way and really fund activities that are pertinent to their business, to their commercialization path. This is what we want to see. And if you see companies that are distracted by goals that are not their initial goal or not their high value application, this is where it gets murky, right? So I think that's, non-dilutive funding can be a great validation if you know how to do this. And some people have it down to a science, and I'm glad they're sitting here. But it's not an easy task, I think, and it's really important to keep that in mind. What both of you have alluded to, really keep that in mind as you're going through and looking at non-dilutive funding opportunities. Let's see, I don't see any questions in the chat or Q&A. Is there anyone that wants to ask anything specific?
Isla, just to follow up on that is, I think we got a lot of feedback multiple times from multiple people saying, VC's not going to like all the grants. I think what you got to be mindful of is, and it's exactly what you're saying, Isla, is that it's about raising money and generating value and revenue potential for the business. And we have a great story. It's a great revenue story on that. And so we've been talking for Epicipher. It's like, we can get non-dilutive funding. So why take funding, right? Like, if we can get there and not dilute, right, and just maintain full ownership of the business. So we've been doing that. And it's not that we're not raising because we don't want to, is that we literally have the liberty of doing that, right? And
investors see through this, right? If you're actually using grants as just a means to fund your R&D, but in a way that is aligned with your business goals, they absolutely see through this. I don't think it's the old, it's a grant mail. You can definitely see through when it is and when it isn't, and when you're interested in commercialization and working towards it through non-dilutive funding.
And I think that comes back to the strategy, though, is designing the grants and the programs to end with a product that you can sell. Because each one of our products, we have 100% success of commercialization. We've made money off of every single grant, and we report that back, right? And it's pretty obvious but that's how you design it. We don't write grants that are going to make money in 7 years, right? We make grants to say that we're going to make money in 2 years, right? And here's how we're going to do it. And so you take small steps and get the products, an MVP. Maybe it's not the exact thing that you want to do, but something that you can get to market and start making money with.
I'll throw in a little question that someone has asked, sent to me. In terms of timeline, how do you kind of manage timeline when the getting grant funding is not immediate, right? Catherine, I think you talked to me about how long it takes to get this kind of grant, and even here when you're applying to SBIRs, there's a cadence to it, right? There's an actual rhythm to it, right? There are different agencies, different deadlines. Some of them are rolling applications. Some of them have once a year. Some have, it's some 3 or 4. How do you kind of plan for continuity with this? And I guess, it's Markus, you've alluded to it in talking about the team that runs these grants, but as in maybe earlier stage company, less experienced with grants, how do you kind of make sure you are you're on it in terms of timeline and managing that? Or how early should you start before the grant is due?
Catherine, you want to take that first, or?
I can take it first, but I have 2 other questions before we close this, because
I love that. I love that our panelists can answer each other's questions. That's fantastic. That's the goal of this call. Yes.
First of all, timing, of course, there are grants where you can apply, whenever you want in the EU and Germany. But the big grants, they normally have timelines, and they go through different phases. And I have to say that, you know, for example, the EIC grant takes approximately 6 to 7 months until you get to the final round. And then you have another 2 or 3 months until you get to the grant agreement. So it is almost a year for writing, going through the phases, working on the pitch, you know, and then getting this money. Other grants are much faster, but my understanding, the big EU funds, they all take forever. And then you also have to look at the chances. So the EIC grant is less than 5%. And for biotech industry, because the EIC grant is for everybody, it's not only biotech or life sciences, and we even have it's like around 2% chance of getting this grant. And then of course you have to evaluate how much energy you want to put into, and that is also my question I have, is what is the chance of getting these kind of grants in the US? You know, because this you have to put in the evaluation. If you apply for grants where you basically have no chance, why doing that?
So I can answer that second question. So cadence, and I'll ask you a question on that. So the way that we do it, I think non-dilutive funding is a strategy, right? And I think it's a strategy that you don't dabble in. I think if you do, you can get in trouble, right? Where you win a grant, and you're like, great, I guess I'm done. But that grant is going to go away in 2 years, and 2 years happens like
very fast.
Before you know it, those grants, they come in, they're gone. So what we've done is we just have a consistent cadence of submissions, and based on if your success rate is around the same thing, you can start to build grant momentum, and we can start to forecast and understand our staffing. So Ciphers never had to do a layoff because we had a retraction of grants. We grew slow, steady, and it's been based on, but it's all about being consistent. It's a marathon race. I think sprints where you submit 3 grants one cycle and then take 2. So in the US, there's 3 cycles a year on the omnibus: January, April, and September. We hit every single one, every single year. We've done that for 8 years. And we do multiple grants. We have a strategy of what we do. And because of that, there's a consistency in the funding that comes out the back end. But if you want money tomorrow, grants aren't gonna be there. So it's a game of patience, and it'll build over time, but you're not gonna build it overnight. It's not gonna be built in a year, and 2 years. It took Epicipher about 5 years to get going. So that's why I think non-dilutive funding and VC funding have a strategy, and it has to be thought through as like, do I want to go this way? Because but if you want to go that way, you want to make investments into it. So that's why we build infrastructure to support it, because we saw it as a long-term strategy. If it's a short-term thing, yeah, maybe it's not worth the wait. Just go get the money another way. But it is good. That's why I think the best for SBIR, right, is if tools is implemented, it's perfect for SBIR because it can be built that way. But if you're doing a diagnostic, I really don't think the SBIR is the right mechanism. It is great for getting it validated in early stuff, but you need to move to another mechanism to get the money to be successful. And then to your question, Catherine, about success, the average is around 20% for a phase 1 and like 25-30% for a phase 2. So a phase 2, you already had a phase 1, so it's already vetted, right? So those grants do better. You heard about the direct to phase 2s. They kind of have the same success rate as a phase 1, and same with the fast tracks. But it's a game of numbers, right? If you end up looking at it as a business, right? Sounded like Ryan's got awesome success, right? Not everybody's going to get 100%, right? But the way we look at it is there's shots on goal. You kind of know what your success rate is, and so you can make some estimates, right? And sometimes you win, you get more grants than you thought, and that's fantastic. But sometimes you lose more too. But there's an average out there, and Epicipher knows we know if we invest a certain amount in submissions, that we'd expect a certain amount in return, and that's paid off, and it's been consistent.
Also plan for resubmission.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is actually a really important point, resubmission. So thank you, Ryan, for bringing it up. I think some of the companies give it a go, and then if it doesn't work, that's it.
Well-
It's a long game, right? It's
And
what you
we
said,
have-
Martis. It's not
we-
it's not tomorrow money, and it's not a one-time thing. If you can resubmit, you can get feedback, you can, there are ways to improve on the way you submit your grant application and actually use what you do and what you already wrote or what you already write for other purposes, right? For white papers, for publication, for whatever, in improving your grant application.
Well, yeah, we've turned not discussed, excuse me, into like 20s, which are like amazing scores in SBIR land. We've taken grants that have been not successful, changed the focus of the application from oncology to something else, and gone from like high scores to success. So it is that strategy, and there's some magic, right? And like, just because the reviewers that you were talking to weren't getting it doesn't mean there's not better ways. And so the ideas that are central to mission that we want to develop, we do get them funded. And there isn't a single grant. Now, it might take 3 tries, right? But there isn't a single grant that we've been like, oh, if only we could get funding for that. Whenever we say that, we get the funding. It just might come 2 years later than when you wanted it, but it does come.
Okay. Can I? It's already. It's almost. It's in Germany. You are early in the morning, and we are late. But I have one more question. Is, do you actually? Like being a European company, is it possible to get funding like you have, or is it enough that you have an Inc? I mean, like a subsidiary in the US? Do you know that?
I don't know the rule.
About 50% ownership for US citizen, has to be US citizen, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Specifically for SBIR. Yeah.
What?
50% ownership. It has to be based in the US. And that's for SBIR. There are other grants that may be slightly different, but for SBIR, and correct me if I'm wrong, Martis, I think that's
that
kind of
means
across all agencies, right?
Okay, and that means 50% ownership of someone who is in the US. So it's
US citizen. You can't be a US. You have to. I mean, you might be able to have a green card. All my international friends who have startups here, they can't get SBIR.
I should get a green card. This is now my.
I don't know if it's green card or citizenship determined, but there's probably something there related. But the ownership has to be above 50%.
I think we have to figure that out, because I think it is really, it's a tremendous difference. So what I learned today is like the funding is so different, and it gives you a lot of opportunity. Of course, you have to do it right. That I understand. You have to have the right strategy. But I think there are great opportunities. And this, not in Germany and not in the EU kind of application we have. I hope that in other countries in the EU it's different. But I'm jealous learning about all your opportunities. Good.
Well,
I think the idea too is that I think if for your company, right, if you had an affiliate, if you spun out an affiliate, right, and had them as like Cellbox US or something, and that had a US person that was, I think that could work, but yeah, it gets a little murky. And then another way to do it is you can collaborate overseas, but you just need to you have to make a case to the funding agency that there's no one else in the world or no one else in the US that would be suitable. But the NIH does do it. And you just have to make a case that,
it's even more tricky, I think, but it is, I think it's great that you have this, and I think it is worth trying. And I think it's very important to grow a company if you have these opportunities.
absolutely. And if you look at in the chat, thank you, Peter and Ryan, that put the SBIR kind of rules about where you have to be located and what's the percentage of your business that is located in the US. And thanks, Peter, for the comment that permanent residents are treated the same as citizens for SBIRs. So good to know that. Well, I would like to, we are kind of a little bit over time, so I'd really like to thank both of you today. I think that was a really great discussion, really actionable for our companies. I'll just end with saying not all grants are created equal. So keep that in mind. You know, there are the phase 1s and the phase 2 and the direct to phase 2 and the different agencies. Some of them have different, you know, it's different amounts. Really not all are created equal. So just like you do with you know, with your funding strategy with investors, similarly it requires a strategy. Do your homework, find out everything you can about this, and lucky for us, we have people within our network and in our cohort that can help and really answer a lot of these questions. So feel free to reach out for us, and we can forward questions to our panelists. They're also part of the, I believe we have a cross-year BioTools alumni channel, and if we don't, we will open one so that you can reach out to our alumni and talk to them, and hopefully maybe see some of you at the capstone event in October, and if not then in our next summit in June. So we'll have a lot of opportunities to get together with our alumni, but feel free to reach out. So really with that, thank you so much, Catherine and Martis, for being here today and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much for having us. I really like what you're doing, I have to say, and I'm jealous again that we don't have that in Europe. So congratulations and thank you very much, and have a great day. I have a great evening. Bye bye.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank
this
you.
Was very fun. Yeah.
We welcome you here, and we'll wait for you to to join us. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks
All the
everyone
best.
in the
Bye-bye.
cohort for being here. We'll see you next week.